European Union superstate envelope. Key part now, of course, of his fear strategy. Well, as usual, aberration and delusion on his part. Now, for some Europhiles, his gamble to call a referendum is perceived and described not only as a reckless gamble, but more an act of national sabotage. Now, David Cameron, my message to you this afternoon, you justly deserve that accusation of guilty of national sabotage. And no amount of concealment or political spin can hide from the public at large that this is the case. Despite very clear evidence that the European Union is under threat from the migration crisis and the huge volume of peoples being allocated European Union entry and residency, our Prime Minister and his governments have seen fit to inflict almost illogical cuts to the key services that protect our citizens and UK society. Now, whether it be border control, policing or prison services, all have seen huge decreases in finance, impacting in an unimaginable degree the resources that guarantee our daily peace of mind. Now, the nature of the threat has indeed changed, but one should ask this very key question before blindly accepting the position of our Prime Minister. And that question, that reliance on European Union institutions, coupled with cooperation in certain areas, will suddenly minimise the impact of his reductions in our policing, our border control and our prisons. Because that is both the Prime Minister's defence and justification for being part of the European Union going forward. Now, only a matter of a few weeks ago, the media laid bare the instance and the actual example of the scale of the security risk now facing the United Kingdom. And I cite, and put this really at the forefront of your mind, 5,000 jihadists have returned after ISIS training. 5,000, everyone. Now, returning, that means they are back on UK soil, or they are back with the potential to be on UK soil. And they're unconstrained, got nothing at all to undertake whatever evil or malicious intent they may have. And they're comfortable in the knowledge that resources and recourse to the human rights legislation will protect their interests rather than that of their victims. Well, Mr. Cameron, to cite your well-worn and very overused phrase, let me be clear. What has happened on your watch and what you condone via continued European Union tinkered membership represents far more of a security risk than anything or anyone could possibly imagine. Yet you continue to defend the misguided stance that only European Union membership will provide the degree of public protection that is actually a pivotal responsibility of any government of Her Majesty the Queen. Jill.
We are told that Great Britain's national security is best served by our membership of the European Union. The Prime Minister pleads that we have more influence in the world as a result of our membership. It has even been suggested that the EU empowers us on the global stage. Wow. These assertions are as false as they are fundamental. Do not be misled. So let me take you to Vienna. Not literally, I'm sorry. Vienna is a former capital of the Habsburg Empire. It sits at a strategic point on the European continent. As a result, it has been besieged by the Ottoman Turks. It has been occupied by the French. It has been occupied by the Russians. It was the setting of the Great Congress of Vienna. It hosts the headquarters of the oil, petroleum exporting countries, OPEC. It is the home to a number of United Nations agencies. Vienna is also the home of the world's largest intergovernmental security arrangement, the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which has absolutely nothing to do with the European Union. The importance of Vienna in terms of the international cooperation relevant to our national security would be very difficult to deny. Yet, in that setting, we are gagged by the European Union. Every month, the ambassadors of 53 countries of the Organisation for Security and Cooperation of Europe gather in the Permanent Council in Vienna. They discuss human rights, freedom of the media, military security, counter-terrorism, border security, the rule of law and policing across the Northern Hemisphere. How important is this little heard of organisation that includes all 28 EU member states and 29 others, including the Russian Federation, the United States, Canada, and all of Central Asia's? Well, perhaps if I tell you that it was the OSCE that negotiated the agreement to the reduction and destruction of the conventional forces in Europe. If I tell you that it was only the forum in which it was possible for Russia and Georgia to meet at the table when they went to war in 2008, and that it was only the OSCE that the parties to the conflicts in Kosovo, Macedonia and Ukraine would agree to work within the field. You will then appreciate its importance to our national security. Yet rather than enhancing our influence in the OSCE, the EU has dramatically weakened it. So let me tell you how. Before every meeting of the 57 ambassadors of the organisation, and in accordance with the Article 34 of the Treaty of the European Union, which requires EU member states to coordinate their foreign policy in all international organisations, the EU drafts one common statement that is then agreed by the member states and read out in the Council by the European Union ambassador. There may be subsequent debate amongst the other 29 non-EU countries, but because it is not possible to gain consensus on what you say in the debate before you say it, Great Britain, the world's 5th largest military power and a nation with one of the greatest diplomatic and foreign policy traditions in the world, is effectively silenced. Unlike the Prime Minister, I hold it as self-evident that a nation that is required to bring its foreign policy down to the lowest common denominator and that has had to surrender its ability to enter into the debate in the world's largest security arrangement does not have a stronger voice in the world and not sovereign in matters of national security or related international cooperation.
Thank you, Jill. But of course, the European Union would want you to think differently as to where the influence and the clout actually resides. And whilst it wants to continue concealing its aspirations for an EU military force, a European army, let's for a moment examine just how far the tentacles of European Union intrusion have encroached into those domestic areas of internal security and protection. And let me just focus on policing for a moment. CEPOL, the first one I want to cite for you, the European Police College that brazenly describes its aim as activities are designed to facilitate the sharing of knowledge and best practices to contribute to the development of a common European law enforcement culture. Changes that are underway which will broaden CEPOL's focus from an agency providing learning opportunities to senior police officers fighting cross-border crime to training a wider target group to include police of all ranks, as well as border guards, customs officials and other state officials and prosecutors. The new regulations even provide CEPOL with the ability to limit the flexibility of member states to decide how law enforcement training should be delivered. And then, of course, there's Europol, the European Police Office with 900 people headquartered in The Hague, working with the Europol national units in each member state. Effective since 1993, thanks to the Lisbon Treaty, its formal status was confirmed in 1998, and since then it's gone on from strength to strength. At the end of 2015, bear in mind, the end of 2015, the European Union decided to grant Europol extensive powers to request private information from member states, and new rules are in process of being enacted that stress that national authorities should provide Europol with the data necessary to fulfil its objectives. Do you remember or recall anything along those lines being included in a party's election manifesto? I don't. And would you have voted for such an intrusion into your personal privacy space? No. Are you even aware that the nature of our policing is under such degree of change thanks to EU aspirations? I doubt it. And no, nothing is out there in the public domain because the government deliberately withholds it, so that individuals like you cannot see and they cannot judge for themselves whether this step towards Europeanisation is in their interests and actually what they want for the future of UK policing. Jill, have a look at interference again.
Thank you, Diane. Modern threats are a common concern to many countries, and we believe that it is in the interest of those countries to work together to address them. Great Britain was at the forefront of the formation of NATO, of the Organisation of Security Cooperation in Europe, and of the United Nations. These organisations remain fit for purpose. It is our capabilities as a nation. It is our membership of these organisations. It is our leading place in the international intelligence community. And it is our permanent seat on the UN Security Council, which, by the way, the EU wants to take from us. That has secured our nation since World War II, and our membership of none of them depends upon our membership of the European Union. In contrast, the institutions of the European Union are hampered by the excessive ideology, bureaucracy and the politics that are endemic in Brussels. They are inefficient, slow and ineffective. EU policies dumb down security responses and any independent security initiatives by member states. Far from enhancing our influence on the global stage, the EU takes the sovereignty and independence of its member states and uses it for itself. The risk conference to our national security is not leaving the European Union, it is remaining in. In having to work to a pace of the slowest and within a framework of ever closer political union, regardless of any opt-outs or status that we may technically be given. Free from the European Union, unhindered by its treaties, by the unaccountable bureaucracy, and by the imposition of its restrictive legislation and policies, none of which we asked for. Great Britain will once again be able to contribute meaningfully and powerfully towards international consensus, cooperation and security. It is in our DNA. It is what we are. I quickly want to talk about borders. Sovereign nation-states establish border controls to protect the integrity of their society, their culture, their laws, their economy from negative or harmful influence from outside. Their border regimes are orientated in the external environment. However, Rather than being outward-looking, the EU is inward-looking. Rather than devolving power, it centralises it. As we see in Diane's example of CEPOL, it is more worried about its centralist ambitions than the raft of inconvenient security threats that it faces, that its officials feel distinctly ill-equipped to address, and that member states would rather it kept its nose out of anyway. The EU cannot control its external borders because it is not succeeding in centralising the function and will not devolve it. It cannot manage internal migration because it has abandoned immigration controls for political purposes. The EU institutional failings in this regard have encouraged and given rise to uncontrolled migration on a phenomenal scale and exacerbated a concurrent increase in terrorist threat. As the EU cannot control its borders, it is imperative that we reassert our right to manage and uphold the integrity of our own.
Now, according to Ronald Noble, the Secretary-General of Interpol from 2000 to 2014, Schengen is, and I quote, an international passport-free zone for terrorists to execute attacks on the continent and make their escape. Even the European Commission has openly admitted that, quote, criminals easily operate across borders, yet it will not permit permanent border controls to be reintroduced. That fundamental tenet of EU doctrine remains untouched, despite clear evidence that it now openly supports threats to the European Union member state security. Now, of course, some cracks have started to appear. The installation of razor wire, the erection of new walls and fences, even daily entry quotas at the borders of some member states. But that is mere tinkering. The lack of border controls in the European Union, it harms Great Britain. Despite our opt-out, as it makes it easier for criminals to smuggle people, drugs and weapons to our borders, be they seaports, airports, the tunnel, or even by ordinary small boats. Now, when the business of people smuggling reaches a value of €6.6 billion in 2015 alone, surely that should signal that the system needs fixing. But for the European Union, such an obvious about-turn is just too much to contemplate. It is almost laughable that an organisation initially called HM Coast Guard, and which owes its origins to the effects made to combat smuggling centuries ago, should have decreased to such an extent under Mr Cameron and his governments, forcing the United Kingdom to rely on European Union resources. And the European Union puts huge faith in these institutions, in the instance of Europol and Frontex to deal with the situation. But where is the credibility in a Europol statement that there was little evidence that terrorist suspects were making use of migrant smuggling networks to enter the continent on a sufficient scale and significant scale, when only months before the head of the same organisation said that the European Union is facing the highest terror threat in a decade because of the migrant crisis. Now, maybe the Europol individual concerned should remember his media lines and stop issuing outright contradictions. But what about Frontex? It's a colossal failure, everyone. It has failed completely to stem mass migration into the European Union. But as ever, the European Union response is more of the same. Fix-it does not even feature in their lexicon. Frontex expansion and name change to the European Border and Coast Guard will see ultimate control ceded even further from national, i.e. United Kingdom systems. Returning to my theme of national sabotage, deliberate running down of the United Kingdom Coast Guard capability to force the United Kingdom to rely on the European Union, guilty as charged, Mr Cameron, in my opinion, guilty as charged. Yep. And Mr Cameron, where was the protection of UK border control in your list of renegotiation achievements? Somehow I don't see it. As usual, nowhere. Jill.
Thank you, Diane. The point is unambiguous. Contrary to what the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary appear to believe, our national security is not dependent on the European Union. Our national security is dependent upon our capabilities, our relationship and our cooperation with all countries of the world. We've seen that far from ensuring it, those who wish to hand over our sovereign independence or any part of it to Brussels are compromising our voice, our global influence and therefore our national security. They are the little Europeans of this world, and although no doubt sincere in their intentions, they are not credible when talking of global security risks. They need to step out of Brussels and raise their eyes to the world. Security experts will tell you that the greatest risk from being in the high-threat environment is adapting to it as a new normal. The analogy is that of a boiled frog. It is said that if you place a frog in boiling water, it will understandably enough jump out. However, if you place the same frog into cold water and then heat that water up gradually by degrees, the frog will adapt and will remain in the water until it's too late to jump. This is how the European Union works. It undermines national security by degrees until we have no self-determination left. Imagine how you would react if it was a foreign power trying to do that. Oh, it is the foreign power trying to do that.
Ladies and gentlemen, our domestic and our national security services serve this country with loyalty, with pride and with conviction. In many instances, they swear an oath to the United Kingdom Head of State, Her Majesty the Queen. They wear insignia that clearly identifies their role, their responsibility and their commitment. Those insignia signal a sovereign state and one of which every United Kingdom citizen should be proud. Despite David Cameron's vague claims to have insulated the United Kingdom from ever closer union, I see those insignia and the allegiance that they represent under very, very clear threat. To cite those immortal words, the United Kingdom is not a star on somebody else's flag, and to ensure that the Crown insignia continues to signal United Kingdom sovereignty in the arena of United Kingdom domestic and national security, only a vote for Brexit and to leave will suffice. Yep.